I didn't realize my daughter-in-law was planning to ruin me until she handed me a pink slip in front of the entire office. I know how that sounds. Cruel. Heartless. It sounds like one of those exaggerated family stories you heard on a late-night talk show. Like a scene from a movie where the final villain, their true face after months of pretending to be an angel. But when you're standing in the middle of a high-rise office, holding a cardboard box while your own son's wife looks at you with a smirk, it doesn't feel like a movie. It feels like a cold, sharp blade cutting through 30 years of sweat, late nights, and hard work. It was a Tuesday morning. The kind of day that starts with a clear sky, the smell of fresh coffee, and the promise of a productive week. I was at my desk, the same desk I'd sat at for the last 5 years as a senior consultant. I liked it there. I liked being in the trenches, hearing the hum of the printers and the frantic typing of the young interns who were eager to prove themselves. I didn't need the corner office with the panoramic view of the city. I didn't need the mahogany desk or the expensive leather chair that costs more than a small car. I chose to be there, among the people who made this company breathe. But Emily, my daughter-in-law, didn't understand the concept of choice. To her, my presence was an obstacle. A relic of a past she wanted to erase so she could build her own throne. She has been the CEO for 6 months now, a position she practically begged David, my son, to help her get. I remember the dinner where she sat across from me, her eyes shining with a hunger she couldn't hide, even under the expensive candlelight. "Linda, you've done enough for this company," she had said, her voice dripping with fake concern like poisoned honey. "Let the younger generation take the lead. You should be at home, gardening, resting your weary bones." I had smiled then, thinking she was just being naive. I told her I wasn't ready to rest. I didn't tell her that resting wasn't in my DNA. And I certainly didn't tell her that this company was my life's blood, built from nothing but a dream and a prayer. But that morning, the honey was gone. There was only the sting. She walked into the open plan office with 2 security guards trailing behind her, their heavy boots thudding against the carpeted floor. The room went silent in a heartbeat. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that happens when people know a storm is coming, but they aren't sure who it's going to hit. She stopped right at my desk, her expensive heels clicking like a countdown. She didn't lean in. She didn't whisper to spare my dignity. She stood tall, pulling her shoulders back, making sure everyone, from the janitors to the vice presidents, could see the spectacle. "Linda," she said, her voice projecting to the very back of the room, vibrating through the glass partitions. "We've reviewed the department's performance. Your role is no longer necessary. In fact, it's a liability." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, not from fear, but from the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it. "My role?" I asked, my voice steady, eyes locked onto hers. "I've brought in 3 major accounts this quarter alone, Emily. Accounts that saved us from the brink of collapse." She didn't blink. Her eyes were cold, like marble. "The board," and by the board, I mean David and myself, "have decided that the company needs a fresh direction, a new aesthetic. Your methods are outdated. You're a ghost of the past, and ghosts don't belong in a modern boardroom." She reached into her designer blazer and pulled out an envelope. The pink slip. It was crisp, white, and felt heavier than lead when she dropped it onto my keyboard. "You have 10 minutes to clear your desk. Security will escort you to the lobby to ensure you don't take any proprietary information on your way out." I looked past her, searching for my son, my David. He was standing by the glass doors of his private office, just 20 feet away. He didn't move. He didn't protest. He didn't even have the courage to look at me. He just stared at his gold watch, then shifted his gaze to a spot on the floor, as if he were waiting for a bus that was running late. That was the moment the ground finally gave way under my feet. Not because of the job. I could get another job. Tomorrow. Not because of the office. But because of the silence of my own flesh and blood. He knew this was happening. He had sat at his kitchen table and helped her plan this execution. I looked at the cardboard box Emily had tossed onto my desk. It was empty, gaping like an open grave. I looked at the faces of my colleagues. Some were shocked, their mouths hanging open. Others were already looking down at their screens, disenchanted that if they made eye contact with me, they would be the next ones fired. Emily leaned in then, her perfume thick and cloying. Her voice finally dropped to a low, venomous whisper that only I could hear. "Don't look for David, Linda. He's finally realizing that family shouldn't be an anchor. You're a burden to his career. You're the mom he has to explain away to his rich friends. I'm just doing the dirty work he was too soft to do. She straightened up, a look of pure, intoxicating triumph on her face. 10 minutes, she repeated, loud enough for everyone to hear again. The clock is ticking, Linda. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't tell her that the board she kept mentioning didn't have the legal authority to fire a fly without a majority vote. I didn't tell her that David only held 5% of the shares I had gifted him on his wedding day as a gesture of love, not as a weapon to be used against me. And I definitely didn't tell her that the mysterious parent company, Alpha Holdings, the one that funded every expansion, covered every loss, and owned the very building she was standing in, wasn't a bank in Switzerland. It was a private trust, a trust that belongs entirely to me. I picked up my stapler. I picked up the small framed photo of my late husband, John, and me on our wedding day. I put them into the box, one by one, with deliberate care. My hands weren't shaking. They were cold, like ice, but they were firm. Emily watched me, her arms crossed, like a predator watching its prey finally stopped struggling. Is that it? No tears. No screaming, she asked, almost disappointed that I wasn't giving her the breakdown she had practiced in the mirror. For now, I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the room like a tolling bell. I stood up, holding the box against my chest like armor. I walked past the security guards, who looked embarrassed to even be there. I walked past my son, who still wouldn't meet my eyes, even as the shadow of my box passed over his polished shoes. And I walked out of the building I had spent 30 years building from a 2-room office with a leaky ceiling into a global empire. As the elevator doors closed on Emily's smug, self-satisfied face, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. She thought she had just fired a senior consultant. She thought she had just cleared the way for her own absolute power. What she didn't realize was that by firing me, she had just triggered the operational interference clause in the company charter, a clause she had never bothered to read because she was too busy picking out the office curtains. The clause that stated the CEO serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, the direct line to the company's chief legal officer. It's Linda, I said, my voice as sharp as a diamond and twice as hard. The audit starts tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., and I want the locks on the executive floor changed by midnight. I believe we have a vacancy for the CEO position. She thought she owned the company. She was about to find out that she didn't even own the air she was breathing in my building. Emily watched me, her arms crossed, like a predator watching its prey finally stopped struggling. Is that it? No tears. No screaming, she asked, almost disappointed that I wasn't giving her the breakdown she had practiced in the mirror. For now, I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the room like a tolling bell. I stood up, holding the box against my chest like armor. I walked past the security guards, who looked embarrassed to even be there. I walked past my son, who still wouldn't meet my eyes, even as the shadow of my box passed over his polished shoes. And I walked out of the building I had spent 30 years building from a 2-room office with a leaky ceiling into a global empire. As the elevator doors closed on Emily's smug, self-satisfied face, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. She thought she had just fired a senior consultant. She thought she had just cleared the way for her own absolute power. What she didn't realize was that by firing me, she had just triggered the operational interference clause in the company charter, a clause she had never bothered to read because she was too busy picking out the office curtains. The clause that stated the CEO serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, the direct line to the company's chief legal officer. It's Linda, I said, my voice as sharp as a diamond and twice as hard. The audit starts tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., and I want the locks on the executive floor changed by midnight. I believe we have a vacancy for the CEO position. She thought she owned the company. She was about to find out that she didn't even own the air she was breathing in my building. Emily watched me, her arms crossed, like a predator watching its prey finally stopped struggling. Is that it? No tears. No screaming, she asked, almost disappointed that I wasn't giving her the breakdown she had practiced in the mirror. For now, I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the room like a tolling bell. I stood up, holding the box against my chest like armor. I walked past the security guards, who looked embarrassed to even be there. I walked past my son, who still wouldn't meet my eyes, even as the shadow of my box passed over his polished shoes. And I walked out of the building I had spent 30 years building from a two-room office with a leaky ceiling into a global empire. As the elevator doors closed on Emily's smug, self-satisfied face, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. She thought she had just fired a senior consultant. She thought she had just cleared the way for her own absolute power. What she didn't realize was that by firing me, she had just triggered the operational interference clause in the company charter, a clause she had never bothered to read because she was too busy picking out the office curtains. The clause that stated the CEO serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, the direct line to the company's chief legal officer. "It's Linda," I said, my voice as sharp as a diamond and twice as hard. "The audit starts tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and I want the locks on the executive floor changed by midnight. I believe we have a vacancy for the CEO position." She thought she owned the company. She was about to find out that she didn't even own the air she was breathing in my building. She had just triggered the operational interference clause in the company charter, a clause she had never bothered to read because she was too busy picking out the office curtains. The clause that stated the CEO serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, the direct line to the company's chief legal officer. "It's Linda," I said, my voice as sharp as a diamond and twice as hard. "The audit starts tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and I want the locks on the executive floor changed by midnight. I believe we have a vacancy for the CEO position." She thought she owned the company. She was about to find out that she didn't even own the air she was breathing in my building. She had just triggered the operational interference clause in the company charter, a clause she had never bothered to read because she was too busy picking out the office curtains. The clause that stated the CEO serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, the direct line to the company's chief legal officer. "It's Linda," I said, my voice as sharp as a diamond and twice as hard. "The audit starts tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and I want the locks on the executive floor changed by midnight. I believe we have a vacancy for the CEO position." She thought she owned the company. She was about to find out that she didn't even own the air she was breathing in my building. I stood on the sidewalk, the cardboard box heavy in my arms, watching the glass doors of the skyscraper swing shut behind me. To any passerby, I was just another elderly woman forced into a premature retirement, a broken employee discarded by a heartless corporation. But as I felt the cold wind against my face, I wasn't feeling broken. I was feeling focused. In the business world, the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who screams or makes a scene. It's the one who quietly walks away and waits for the right moment to strike. Emily thought she had won. She thought the silence from my son, David, was a sign of his complete submission to her will. She thought she had successfully cut the anchor that was holding them back. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't the anchor. I was the foundation. And when you remove the foundation, the entire structure begins to lean. I walked to the parking garage, my heels clicking with a rhythm that felt like a ticking clock. Every person I passed, the security guard who had checked my ID for years, the barista in the lobby who knew my order by heart, they all looked at the box in my arms with pity. I didn't mind. Let them pity me for now. Pity is a great mask for power. I reached my car, placed the box in the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment in the silence. I looked at the framed photo of John that I had just rescued from my desk. John, who had started this company with me when we were both 25 and had nothing but a shared vision. He always says, "Linda, the best way to handle a snake isn't to wrestle it. It's to remove the ground it crawls on." Emily was the snake. And David was the ground she was crawling on. It hurts to think of him. My son, the boy I had raised to be honorable, stood there and watched his wife humiliate me. But I knew David. He wasn't malicious, he was weak. He had let himself be blinded by Emily's ambition, thinking that her ruthlessness was what the company needed. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between ruthlessness and true leadership. I didn't drive home. Instead, I drove to a small, unassuming law office on the outskirts of the city. This wasn't the flashy, glass-walled firm that handled our corporate mergers. This was the office of Marcus Thorne, the man who had been my personal attorney for 3 decades. Marcus was the only one who knew the true extent of Alpha Holdings, the parent company that sat quietly at the top of the corporate pyramid. When I walked in, Marcus didn't look surprised to see the cardboard box in my hands. He had seen the news of Emily's appointment to CEO months ago, and he had warned me then that a power struggle was inevitable. They did it, didn't they? Marcus asked, standing up to take the box from me. Emily handed me a pink slip in front of the whole staff. David watched and said nothing. I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. Marcus sobbed, shaking his head. They have no idea what they've just triggered, Linda. They think they fired a consultant. They don't know they've just defaulted on the primary governance agreement. We spent the next 4 hours in his dimly lit office, surrounded by the smell of old paper and the hum of a shredder. The plan was simple, but deadly. Alpha Holdings didn't just own the shares. It provides the operational capital that keeps the daily wheels turning. Emily had been making grand plans for expansion, spending money that she assumed was the company's profit. In reality, that money was an interest-free credit line provided by my trust. By firing me, Emily had violated the continuity of leadership clause. According to the contract, if I were ever removed from the company without a unanimous vote of the founding shareholders, which included me, the credit line would be frozen immediately. The audit starts tomorrow, I told Marcus. I want every cent accounted for. Every expense report Emily signed. Every luxury dinner she charged to the company. Every bonus she gave herself. I want it all on my desk by noon. Marcus smiled, a sharp, cold look that mirrored my own. It will be done, Linda. By tomorrow morning, the company's bank accounts will be flagged. Emily will find that her corporate credit card won't even buy her a cup of coffee. I left Marcus's office as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, orange shadows over the city. I drove home to the quiet house I had shared with John, but I didn't go to sleep. I sat in my study, the one room Emily had never dared to enter, and I began to pull the strings. I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the head of operations, a man who had been with me since the beginning. He was horrified when I told him what happened. They did what? Linda, half the staff is ready to walk out. They're disenchanted of her, he said. Don't let them walk out yet. I told him. Tell them to stay. Tell them to wait. Something is coming. The second call was to our biggest client, a woman who controls a multi-billion-dollar retail chain. She didn't like Emily. She thought she was arrogant and inexperienced. If you're out, Linda, then my contract is under review, she said firmly. Not yet, Sarah. Just wait 48 hours. Let Emily think she's in charge. Let her make one more big mistake. The third call was the hardest. It was to David. He picked up on the third ring. His voice was hushed, as if he were hiding. Mom? Are you okay? He whined. I'm fine, David. I just wanted to let you know that I'm not angry, I said, lying with a precision that only 30 years in business can teach you. Emily said it was for the best. She said the company was stagnant. I didn't know how to stop her, Mom, he confessed. It's all right, son. You made your choice. I just hope you're prepared for the consequences of Emily's fresh direction. It's going to get very cold in that office tomorrow. I hung up before he could respond. I sat in the dark, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The trap was set. Emily thought she had cut me out of her life and her company. Tomorrow, she was going to walk into work feeling like a queen. And by the time the sun went down, she was going to realize that her throne was made of ice, and I was the one who controlled the temperature. The silent reprisal had begun, and there was no way for her to stop it. Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Normally, I'd be the first one in the office at this hour, smiling at the security guard and checking the sales reports early. But today, I'm sitting in my living room, sipping a hot cup of tea and looking out at the tranquil garden. My phone sits on the desk, vibrating incessantly like a living thing. It's messages from loyal employees, those witnessing the nightmare beginning at headquarters. In the CEO's office, Emily was undoubtedly basking in her triumph. She walked in her latest designer outfit, ready to issue orders for radical change. Little did she know that when she signed the order to fire me yesterday, she had inadvertently triggered a self-destruct mechanism I had set up years earlier to protect John's legacy. The first rule of power: never fire the key to a treasure if you don't know where the treasure is located. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the first problem arose. Marcus, my lawyer, had sent a formal notice to the partner bank and the company's finance department. According to Alpha Holdings terms, all credit lines would be immediately frozen if there were any senior management changes without the consent of the founding shareholders. At the office, Emily was meeting with the marketing team about a massive $5 million expansion campaign. She slammed her hand on the table, ordering immediate disbursement to book primetime advertising slots. "We can't wait." Linda was too slow, but I'm not, Emily declared arrogantly in front of 15 subordinates. But when the chief financial officer, a man named Robert, who had worked with me for 10 years, looked at the computer screen, his face turned pale. "CEO, there's a problem." "The transfer order was rejected," Robert said, his voice trembling. Emily raised an eyebrow, a scornful smile on her face. "Rejected? Are you kidding me? Check the system. We have tens of millions of dollars in our reserve account." "The problem isn't the system, Emily," Robert stammered. "The bank just sent a notification. Alpha Holdings account, our main source of funding, has been frozen for violation of governance terms. We can't withdraw a single cent." Silence fell over the meeting room. Emily stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. She pulled out her business credit card and tossed it onto the table. "Use this to pay the deposits immediately. I'll call the bank later." That old woman definitely pulled some trick before she left. Robert took the powerful black card and tried swiping it on the handheld payment terminal. A dry beep sounded. "Denied," Robert whispered. The card Emily used to show off her status was now nothing more than a useless piece of plastic. Meanwhile, David, my son, was sitting in his private office, trying to avoid the scrutinizing eyes of the staff. He was beginning to realize something was wrong. He called me. I saw the name son on the phone screen, but I didn't answer. Sometimes, the best way to teach a child the value of what they have is to let them experience the feeling of losing everything. I wanted him to see who Emily truly was without the money and power to mask her. At 11 o'clock in the morning, the real storm hit. Sarah, the company's biggest client, the one I'd called last night, appeared in the building's lobby. She had no appointment. She walked straight into the CEO's office without the secretary's permission. Emily tried to regain her composure, standing up to greet her. "Sarah? What a surprise. Are you here to congratulate me on my new position?" Sarah didn't sit down. She looked at Emily as if she were an outdated object. "I'm here to deliver the termination notice. According to the core personnel clause, if Linda is no longer running or advising on my campaigns, I have the right to withdraw without compensation." Emily's face turned from red to pale. "You can't do that. We've been working together for 10 years. "Yes," Sarah replied coldly. "I've been working with Linda for 10 years. And you? You just fired the only person I trusted in this building. Good luck with this mess, Emily." When Sarah walked out, chaos erupted in the CEO's office. Suppliers began calling demanding payment of outstanding bills. Employees started whispering about whether they would even get paid for the month. Emily screamed into the phone, trying to contact the bank, but the only answer she received was, "We only deal with the legal representatives of Alpha Holdings. And that's not you, ma'am." David rushed into Emily's room. His face panicked. "Emily, what's going on? Mom isn't answering the phone. The bank is closed. We're losing all our clients." Emily turned around, her eyes blazing with anger at her husband. "Shut up. It's all that old woman's fault. She's extorting us. You have to go see her immediately. Tell her to stop this nonsense, or I'll sue her for sabotage." I sat at home, watching the clock. It was almost noon. Just then, Marcus sent me an email with a list of Emily's unauthorized personal expenses paid for with company money over the past 6 months. Luxury trips, diamond jewelry, and even a deposit on a penthouse in her own name. I smiled, a smile devoid of warmth. Emily thought she'd fired me. Little did she know, I had just begun the process of stripping her of everything she wore. "David, Emily, the real game has only just begun," I muttered to myself. The doorbell rang incessantly, shattering the afternoon's tranquility. I didn't need to look through the camera to know who it was. Only the desperate would ring the doorbell, as if they wanted to smash this oak door to pieces. I slowly put down my book, adjusted my collar, and went to open the door. David and Emily stood there. David looked like a ghost, his eyes sunken and his hair disheveled. And Emily? Her arrogance had been replaced by a mask of rage. She was still wearing the designer dress from this morning, but it now looked ridiculous in the face of the company's collapse. "Mom, why did you do this?" David exclaimed the moment the door opened. "The bank, the clients, everything has stopped. Emily can't run anything." I didn't answer my son immediately. I stepped back, gesturing for them to come in. "Come in. Don't stand out there bothering the neighbors. They still think our family is educated." Emily entered the living room, not sitting down, but pacing like a caged animal. "Do you think you've won, Linda?" Emily yelled. "You're destroying your husband's company. Do you know that without the capital from Alpha Holdings, we'll be bankrupt in 48 hours? I'll sue you for breach of fiduciary duty." I sat down in my usual armchair, poured myself a fresh cup of tea, completely ignoring her rage. "Suing me, Emily?" I smiled, a smile that made her freeze. "Before you talk about the law, you should understand where you stand. You're not the owner. You're just a hired CEO. And under contract, a CEO serves to the satisfaction of the majority shareholder. Right now, I'm not satisfied at all. David is a shareholder too." Emily pointed to her husband. "He agrees with me." I looked at David. He avoided my gaze. "David holds 5% of the shares I gifted you," I said, my voice icy. 5% isn't enough for you to buy a chair in the boardroom without my permission. Emily, you've been so busy showing off your power that you forgot to read the ownership structure of Alpha Holdings. That parent company doesn't belong to David. It's mine." Emily was about to interrupt, but I raised my hand. It was time to play my first card. I pushed a thick stack of files on the desk toward them. "While you two were busy firing me yesterday, Marcus and my audit team worked through the night. Emily, you talk about me sabotaging the company? So what do you call these things?" Emily trembled as she opened the file. Her face turned from pale to ashen when she saw the red highlighted lines. "Invoices for jewelry purchases at Cartier worth $80,000, recorded under gifts for business partners. 2 vacations in the Maldives, recorded under market research. And here's the most interesting part." I tapped my fingers lightly on the table. "A $2 million deposit for a penthouse in the city center, drawn from Alpha Holdings investment fund under the guise of contingency operating expenses." David snatched the file, flipping through the pages rapidly, his hands trembling. "Emily, what is this? You told me it was a sales bonus." Emily stammered, her confidence completely shattered. I just borrowed it. When the new project is successful, I'll pay it back." "Linda, you can't do this to me. This is a family matter." "Family." I stood up abruptly, the imposing presence of 30 years of running the corporation making the room seem smaller. "You're using the concept of family to justify embezzlement? When you humiliated me in front of the employees, did you think of me as family? When you told David that I was an anchor holding back his career, did you think of family?" I walked closer to Emily, looking her straight in the eyes. "Marcus has filed a report about these irregularities with the Economic Investigation Agency. Tomorrow morning, it won't be clients coming to see you, Emily. It will be the police and tax inspectors. You signed all these documents. Embezzlement of company assets on this scale. I believe the sentence will be no less than 10 years. David knelt on the floor, clutching my sleeve. "Mom, please, don't do this. Emily will go to jail. The company will be ruined. Please save us this one time." I looked at my son, my heart aching, but my mind perfectly clear. "I'm not doing anything, David. I'm just giving Emily back what she's always craved, professionalism. And a professional leader must be held accountable for their criminal actions." I turned to Emily, who stood frozen, tears beginning to fall, but they were tears of fear, not regret. "You have 12 hours to pack your things and leave David's house. The house I'm also paying monthly mortgage on. And David," I looked at my son, "if you choose to go with her, you'll have to learn to pay for the lavish lifestyle you're enjoying. Alpha Holdings will revoke all privileges starting tomorrow." "Linda, you can't be so heartless." Emily cried out. "I can," I replied coldly, "because I'm the one who built it. And I won't let a lowlife like you ruin it for personal ambition." I pointed toward the door. "Go. Before I change my mind and call the police right now." As the door slammed shut behind them, I sat back down in my chair. The room fell silent again, but the battle had only just begun a new chapter. Tomorrow morning, I'll be back at the office. Not to do counseling, but to clean up the mess and reclaim what's mine. Thursday morning, 15 minutes to 8. My sleek black car slowly pulled into the main lobby of Alpha Tower. This time, I wasn't alone. I was with Marcus and a team of 5 legal professionals in black suits, carrying briefcases filled with injunctions and audit files. As I stepped out of the car, the 2 security guards in the lobby froze. They were used to seeing me quietly walk in as an ordinary consultant. But today, my demeanor was different. I was no longer the CEO's mother. I was the owner of the name engraved on the foundation stone of this building. "Good morning, Mrs. Linda," the head security guard stammered, hastily pressing the button to open the VIP gate that Emily had ordered locked to me yesterday. I just nodded slightly. "Thank you. Everything will be fine from now on." We headed straight to the executive elevator. When the doors opened on the top floor, a chaotic scene unfolded. Employees were huddled in small groups, whispering about company credit card rejections and major clients withdrawing en masse. Emily stood in the middle of the lobby, yelling at her personal secretary for being unable to contact the banking department. "I told you to call them immediately. Why is my personal account frozen too?" Emily roared, her meticulously made-up face now a pathetic sight with smudged mascara from crying the night before. My cane clattered dryly against the marble floor. All eyes turned toward the elevator door. Emily froze, her eyes widening at my sight. What are you doing here? I fired you." "Security. Why did you let her up here?" Emily yelled, but no one moved. The security guards she'd hired yesterday just stood there staring at Marcus, who held up a notice bearing the red seal of the Alpha Holdings Board of Directors. I walked over to the main reception desk, placed my elegant handbag on it, and glanced around the office. "Listen, everyone." My voice wasn't loud, but its authority silenced the entire office. "I am Linda, a founding shareholder and the highest-ranking executive at Alpha Tower. From this moment on, Emily is suspended from her position as CEO, pending an investigation into embezzlement and breach of trust." Emily burst into hysterical laughter. "Suspend me? By what right? I'm the legitimate CEO. David, where are you? Tell your mother to leave." David emerged from his office, his face as white as a sheet. He looked at me, then at Emily, and finally bowed his head. "Emily, stop," David whispered. "The Alpha Holdings lawyers sent a notice. This morning, our executive authority has been revoked." I turned to Marcus. "Marcus, proceed with the next steps." Marcus stepped in front of Emily, his voice cold as a verdict. "Ms. Emily, this is an order to seal the CEO's office and seize all company property, including your phone, laptop, and car keys. You have 10 minutes to leave the building under our supervision. If you resist, the police waiting on the ground floor will intervene." Emily recoiled, bumping into the swivel chair. "No, this can't be. This is my company. I've worked to modernize it." "You haven't modernized it, Emily." I stepped closer, my gaze sharp. "You've just turned it into your personal purse to serve your vanity. While my employees work hard, you're siphoning off funds to buy your own penthouse. That's not management, that's theft." I turned to look at the stunned employees standing around me. "Everyone get back to work. Your salaries for this month will be paid in full this afternoon. Alpha Holdings has disbursed new funds to cover the losses caused by this modern CEO. Those who helped Emily conceal the illicit expenditures, prepare your explanations for Marcus's audit team. I will show no mercy to any traitors." Emily was completely broken down by then. 2 security guards approached and grabbed her arms. This time, they weren't taking her orders. They looked at me, waiting for confirmation. I just nodded. As Emily was dragged out of the office, she continued to scream about me being a cruel old woman. But the screaming gradually subsided as the elevator doors slammed shut. I turned to David, who was still standing trembling in the corner of the room. "And you, David," I said, my voice tinged with sadness but utterly firm. "You have 10 minutes to clean up your office. You're not fired, but you're suspended without pay until the audit team determines your level of involvement in Emily's affairs. Go." David said nothing, silently turning back into the room. I walked into the CEO's office, the office John and I had designed together. I opened the curtains, letting the sunlight flood into the room, which had been tainted by the smell of cheap perfume and Emily's lies. I sat down, in the large chair, resting my hands on the oak desk. The Queen was back, but this kingdom was scarred. "Marcus," I called into the internal phone. "Call Sarah and the major partners. Tell them I want an urgent meeting this afternoon. We have a lot of work to do to regain trust." The purge was only the first step. Now, I faced the biggest challenge. rebuilding Alpha Tower from the ruins my son and daughter-in-law created. And more importantly, I must prepare for the final legal steps to remove Emily from our lives forever. Thursday afternoon. Alpha Tower's top management meeting room. A tense atmosphere hung over me as I sat at the head of the table, facing Sarah and 3 other strategic investors. They weren't there for coffee. They were there to see if the Alpha Tower ship was truly sinking. Emily had left a huge void of trust. Linda, we respect you, but the numbers Emily has reported over the past 6 months are a disastrous lie, Sarah said, tapping lightly on the preliminary audit report. Our confidence has been depleted. I looked each person straight in the eye, without flinching. I understand. That's why I'm here. Alpha Holdings will use my personal assets to guarantee all short-term debts Emily has incurred. Furthermore, I will cut back on all of her frivolous projects to focus on the core business we've built. I pushed a new legal commitment toward them. This is the new governance agreement. From now on, no one, not even my son, has the right to sign any expenditures exceeding $100,000 without my signature. I pledge this on my honor and all of my shares. The silence lasted a few seconds. Then Sarah was the first to smile. That's the Linda we know. Okay, I'll withdraw my termination request. But you know, Emily won't leave you alone. She's no longer in a position to do that, Sarah. I replied, my voice cold. Because tomorrow morning, Emily will realize that she's not only lost her job, but her freedom. Friday morning, 7:30. I was in my office, sipping a bitter black coffee, when Marcus walked in. His face showed the fatigue of a sleepless night, but his eyes gleamed with triumph. It's done, Linda, Marcus placed a file bearing the seal of the police investigation agency on my desk. The summons was sent to Emily's penthouse 10 minutes ago. And you won't believe it. She's planning to run away. Escaping. I raised an eyebrow. That's right. She booked a flight to Singapore for 10 o'clock this morning. But we were one step ahead. All her bank accounts have been completely frozen. She couldn't even afford a bus ticket, let alone a business class plane ticket. Just then, the lobby security camera showed a chaotic scene. Emily appeared with 2 large suitcases, her hair disheveled, screaming at security because her resident card had been deactivated. She was trying to break in to find David, hoping for one last chance at help. I stepped out onto the office balcony and looked down into the lobby. David was standing there, looking at his wife as if she were a stranger. He didn't approach, he didn't take her hand. He just stood there, motionless. 3 plainclothes police officers approached. They didn't make a fuss. They simply handed her a piece of paper and invited her to follow them. Emily began to wail. This old woman, this cruel old woman has wronged me. But no one paid any attention to her cries anymore. The officers she had once insulted now stood with their arms crossed, watching her go, their eyes devoid of any pity. 10 minutes later, David knocked on my door. He came in, trembling and distraught. Mom, they really arrested her. Is the embezzlement charge that serious? I looked at my son, my disappointment still there, but my sternness unchanged. David, don't you understand? This isn't just embezzlement. She deliberately forged my signature on clandestine share transfer documents. That's fraud and misappropriation of assets at the most serious level. I gave her a chance to stop, but she chose to drive me out of this building. David knelt down, his head resting on my knees. I'm sorry, Mother. I was so blind. I thought she was strong, but it turns out she's just a thief. Strength isn't about stepping on others to get ahead, David. I stroked his head, but my voice remained firm. Strength is about protecting what you've built. You let her manipulate you because you were too lazy to manage your father's legacy yourself. This is the price you have to pay. I stood up and rearranged the files on my desk. This morning, Mom signed an order to revoke 5% of my shares under the business ethics clause. You'll start over as an intern in the warehouse. If you want to return to this office, you have to climb the ladder yourself, through your own hard work, not by the title Linda's son. David was silent for a long time. Then he stood up, wiped away his tears, and nodded. I understand, Mom. I'll go. When David left, I sat alone in the quiet space of the CEO's office. Emily was in the interrogation room. David was heading towards the warehouse, and the company was beginning to revive. I opened the desk drawer and took out a picture of John. Everything's back on track, John. But this game still has one final chapter. The landline phone rang. It was Marcus. Linda, there's a new development. During the search of Emily's laptop, we found a hidden file. It seems she wasn't acting alone. There's an anonymous infiltrator who's been providing her with inside information for 2 years. My eyes narrowed. Find that person immediately. I want to know who dared stab me in the back in my own home. The battle with Emily may be over, but a bigger plot is unfolding. And this time, I won't let anyone get their hands on that pink slip again. The CEO's office was so quiet on Friday afternoon, you could hear the ticking of the clock. Emily had been taken away, David had gone down to the warehouse, but my feeling of victory was incomplete. Marcus's words still haunted me. She didn't act alone. An enemy who reveals themselves is terrifying, but the enemy lurking in the shadows, smiling at you every day, is the one who can deliver the fatal blow. I sat in front of Emily's laptop screen, which Marcus had just decrypted. The encrypted files began to appear. They weren't just numbers from embezzlement. They were detailed reports on my daily routines, schedules for secret Alpha Holdings meetings, and even my personal medical records. Emily wasn't smart enough to collect this herself. She needed someone with access to the deepest levels of the system, someone I completely trusted. Ms. Linda, the technical team has traced the IP address that sent these files to Emily. Marcus walked in, his face more tense than ever. It didn't come from outside. It came from a computer right here on this floor, and it was sent over a privileged internal network. I looked at the list of people with privileged network access. Only 5. Me, David, Marcus, Robert, the CFO, and my chief secretary, Mr. Thomas, who had been with me since the early days of my career. Marcus, call Mr. Thomas in. I ordered, my voice calm but my hands gripping the armrest of the chair. Thomas entered. He was, as always, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, his white hair neatly combed, and in his hand was the notebook he had used to record all my orders for the past 20 years. You called me, Mrs. Linda? Thomas bowed, his voice deep and respectful. I didn't look at him. I turned my chair around, looking out the panoramic window at the city. Thomas, do you remember the early days when we started out in that 2-room rented office? Back then, John and I used to say that you weren't just a secretary, you were part of this family. I always remember that, ma'am, Thomas replied calmly. My loyalty to Alpha Tower has never wavered. I turned my chair around and pushed the laptop screen toward him. A special access code was highlighted in red. So how do you explain your personal digital signature being used to unlock my secure files and send them to Emily's hidden mailbox for the past 2 years? Every time she withdrew money from the reserve fund, you were the one who legitimized those transactions on the system before Robert could see them. The room fell into an eerie silence. There was no crying, no panic. Thomas slowly lowered his notebook. His stern face showed no change in expression. Only his eyes shifted from respectful to a coldness I had never seen before. Emily is just a pawn, isn't she, Thomas? I continued, my voice sharp. You promised to help her overthrow me, to make her a puppet CEO, while you would be the real controller of Alpha Tower from behind the scenes. You knew David was weak, you knew Emily was greedy, and you used them to achieve your ambitions. Thomas chuckled softly, a sarcastic laugh. You're always so good at reading people's minds, Linda. Yes, Emily is a fool and a frivolous person. She thinks she's using me, but in reality, I've been leading her step by step to this hole today. Why? I snarled. I gave you everything. Money, status, respect. Respect. Thomas suddenly stepped closer to the desk, his voice trembling with long-suppressed hatred. 20 years. I stood behind you and John like a shadow. I handled all the messes. I stayed up all night preparing for the glories you received in the newspapers. But in your eyes, I'm still just Mr. Thomas, the secretary. I want this Alpha Tower to bear my name, not yours. I looked at the man in front of me, feeling utterly disgusted. Ambition has blinded you, Thomas. Do you think helping Emily seize the assets is the way to get the company? You're just destroying yourself. Not necessarily, Linda. Thomas pulled a USB drive from his jacket pocket. Do you think sending Emily to jail is the end? I have all the records of your illegal personal bail applications from 10 years ago, the shady projects John has been involved in. I have them all. If I go down, Alpha Tower will explode along with me. I looked at the USB drive, then at his insane confidence. Marcus was about to step forward to stop me, but I held him back. Do you think I'm not prepared for betrayal, Thomas? I stood up and took another stack of documents from the drawer. You've been so busy monitoring me that you've forgotten that Alpha Holdings system has a third-layer security protocol that only John and I know about. Every access you've made to the secure files has been recorded and stored on an independent server for 18 months. I glanced at my watch. The cybersecurity team and economic police received all the evidence of your extortion and document forgery 5 minutes ago. That USB drive? It's just additional evidence to incriminate you of trade secret theft. The sirens of police cars blared again in the building's lobby. For the second time in less than 24 hours, Alpha Tower had witnessed a high-level purge. Thomas froze, the USB drive slipping from his hand. His confidence vanished, replaced by shock. He had forgotten that the woman he called Anchor was actually a captain who had weathered thousands of storms. When the police entered the office and handcuffed Thomas, he glared at me with hatred. I simply said coldly, "You're right about one thing, Thomas. You're not my secretary. You're a lesson I've paid a very high price to learn." Thomas was taken away. Marcus breathed a sigh of relief, but I slumped into my chair. Alpha Tower felt utterly empty. The people I loved and trusted most had turned their backs on me. "Mrs. Linda, are you all right?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," I replied, my eyes fixed on John's photograph. "But we need a complete change of the board of directors. And Marcus, prepare the paperwork for a divorce. I want Emily to disappear completely from David's life, whether she wants it or not. The traitors have been exposed, but the wounds they inflicted will take a long time to heal. This power game has taken too much, and now it's time for me to clean up the mess and protect what remains." After the storm came an eerie silence. The main hall of Alpha Tower was now devoid of Emily's screams or Thomas's haunting presence. But this silence did not equate to peace. It was the silence of a construction site awaiting reconstruction from the ruins. On Saturday morning, I didn't rest. I convened an emergency board meeting, but this time, the long round table was occupied by only 3 people: myself, Marcus, and Robert, the only one on the board not tainted. The empty chairs around us were a testament to the audit team's purge. "We've lost 40% of our senior staff in the last 48 hours, Marcus reported, his eyes dark with lack of sleep. "The police are expanding their investigation to the subsidiaries. Emily and Thomas are blaming each other in the interrogation room, but our evidence is overwhelming." I looked at the company's organizational chart, my hand gripping a red pen as I crossed out the names of those who had betrayed me. Don't worry about the empty seats. Alpha Tower needs fresh blood, not parasites. Robert, promote the middle managers who sided with us in the failed strike. I want a board that operates based on competence, not flattery. But my biggest problem wasn't the numbers. It was the company's warehouse. That afternoon, I drove myself to the suburban shipping depot. Amidst the huge stacks of goods and the deafening roar of truck engines, I found David. He was wearing his dark blue worker's uniform, his face smeared with grease, struggling to move heavy crates under the watchful eye of a stern warehouse manager. I stood at a distance, watching my son. The boy who once wore $1,000 suits, sat in air-conditioned offices, and ordered hundreds of people around, was now experiencing the value of a real salary. He looked exhausted, but in his eyes, for the first time, I saw a glimmer of reality. David saw me. He stopped what he was doing, his breath coming in short gasps. "Mom, did you come to see how pathetic I am?" "I came to give you this," I said coldly, handing him a stack of documents. David opened them. It was a pre-drafted divorce petition, complete with clauses protecting Alpha Holdings assets. "Emily told the police that you masterminded everything to mitigate her guilt," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "She's trying to drag you down with her. If you don't sign this divorce petition immediately, my lawyers won't be able to extricate you from her criminal case." David trembled, sweat mixing with dirt streaming down his face. She really did that? I betrayed my mother for her. That's the first lesson in ruthlessness that you admire in her, David." I turned away. "Sign it and focus on finishing this loading. That's the only way you can keep your father's name." Monday morning, a day of rebirth. I walked into the CEO's office, but this time I ordered the removal of all the furniture Emily had decorated. Expensive abstract paintings, gaudy crystal vases, they were thrown into the hallway. I ordered John's old oak desk and chairs brought back from storage. Mrs. Linda, Sarah, and the major partners are already in the meeting room. announced the new secretary, a young, capable woman I had just hired. I walked into the meeting room. This time, there was no doubt. As I sat down in the chair, Sarah rose and applauded, followed by the entire room. "We saw the report this morning," Sarah said, her eyes filled with admiration. "You not only took the company back, you cleaned it up. We're ready to sign a 10-year contract, with one condition: you must be in direct supervision." "I'll oversee it," I smiled. "But Alpha Tower will no longer be a family-run company. We're going public and listing on the stock exchange. I want every employee here to be an owner, so no one can use personal power to manipulate them again." Late that afternoon, Marcus walked into my office with a serious expression. "Linda, there's news from the detention center. Emily wants to see you. She says she has one last secret about Thomas that you need to know. Something related to John's death 10 years ago." I froze. The pen in my hand nearly dropped. For 10 years, I believed John died of a stroke from overwork. But looking at Thomas's deviousness and Emily's madness, a chill ran down my spine. "Get the car ready, Marcus." I stood up, my eyes as sharp as a blade. If they really are involved in John's affair, then 10 years in prison for Emily is still too lenient. The battle to reclaim the company has been won, but the real battle to protect the truth about my family has only just begun. The enemy seemed defeated, but ghosts from the past are starting to resurface, demanding final reckoning. The neon lights in the visiting room of the detention center flickered on and off, creating dim streaks of light on the cold metal table. I sat there, facing Emily through a thick pane of reinforced glass. After only 3 days in detention, the arrogant woman who had once insulted me in the office now looked like a walking corpse. Her designer clothes had been replaced with a baggy gray prisoner's uniform. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes were sunken with despair. But when she saw me, she managed a crooked smile. "So you've arrived, Linda? To see how pathetic I am, or to sign the final divorce papers for your darling son?" Emily whispered, her voice hoarse but still sharp. I set the file down on the table, my eyes devoid of any pity. "You called me here because of John's death. Don't waste my time with those meaningless sarcastic remarks, Emily. What do you know about 10 years ago?" Emily tilted her head, the clanking of the shackles on her feet jarring. 10 years ago, I was just a small intern at Alpha Tower. But Thomas wasn't. He was there, right next to your husband, when he collapsed in the office that fateful night. You always believed John died of a stroke, didn't you? The autopsy report says so. I growled, my heart beginning to beat faster. That report was orchestrated by Thomas. Emily suddenly leaned forward, her eyes blazing with madness. He told me about it while he was drunk, when we were planning to overthrow her. Thomas didn't just want the CEO position, he'd hated John for a long time. That night, John discovered Thomas had embezzled a large sum of money for his own investments. They argued. John was about to call the police, and Thomas, he swapped John's heart medication with a potent vasoconstrictor. I felt a jolt run down my spine, my hands gripping the armrest of the chair to keep from falling. "Do you have proof? Or is this just a lie to drag Thomas down with you?" Emily sneered, tears beginning to stream down her smudged face. "The proof is in a secret drawer at Thomas's old house. He's a psychopath, Linda. He kept that vial of medicine as a trophy. Thomas always said John was too weak to own an empire like Alpha, and that he was just helping the company grow. He manipulated David, using me as a pawn to finish what he couldn't do with John, get rid of her." I jumped to my feet, the room spinning. For 10 years, I had allowed the man who killed my husband to sit right behind me, making me coffee every morning and pretending to wipe away tears with me on the anniversary of John's death. This betrayal went far beyond any monetary calculations. It was the most primal form of cruelty. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "Because I want you to live in torment." Emily laughed loudly, a bitter, sarcastic laugh. "You won the company, but you lost your life. Your husband was murdered by your best friend, your son betrayed his mother, and now you're left alone with that cold pile of money. I'm going to prison, but you'll live with John's ghost forever." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the visiting room. Marcus was waiting for me in the hallway, looking worried. "Linda, what did she say? You look like you just saw the devil." "Marcus, we're not going back to the office," I said, my voice chillingly cold. "Call the task force. I want to search Thomas's house immediately. And Marcus, retrieve John's medical records from 10 years ago. I want to unearth the whole truth. That night, in the presence of the police, we broke into Thomas's old apartment. Behind the wooden wall in his study, a secret drawer sprang open. Among the old files was a small vial, its label faded, but inside were still 2 strange blue pills. Marcus picked up the vial, his hands trembling. If this is true, Thomas isn't just an economic criminal. He's a psychological serial killer. I stood in the shadows of the apartment, watching the flashing lights of the police cars. Everything Emily had said was slowly becoming true. Thomas had been preparing this plan for a decade. He had killed John, then patiently waited for David to grow up so he could use him as a springboard to overthrow me. Just then, my phone rang. An unknown number. Linda, do you think finding that vial of medicine is the end of it? Thomas's voice rang out, chillingly calm. I knew Emily would betray me. I'm no longer at the police station. The sick leave paperwork was done an hour ago thanks to connections you'll never know about. I squinted into space. You're not getting away with this, Thomas. The whole world will know you're a murderer. Perhaps, Thomas chuckled faintly. But before I go, I want to give you one last gift. Check the security cameras at the warehouse where David works. It seems your son couldn't handle the pressure and found an escape route that I've prepared for him. My heart stopped beating. I yelled into the phone, "What have you done to David?" But all I heard was a lifeless beeping sound. "Marcus, come to the warehouse immediately," I screamed, running frantically towards the car. Emily's game was just the beginning. Thomas was the real monster. He didn't just want the company. He wanted to completely destroy my family. This battle had escalated from the office to the line between life and death. My Mercedes sped through the night, like an arrow tearing through the city's fog. The speedometer needle had hit 120, but inside me, everything seemed to freeze with fear. Marcus sat beside me, his hand clutching his phone, constantly coordinating the security team and the police, but his face was pale. Thomas bribed a forensic doctor to falsify medical records and get bail in 2 hours. Marcus shouted through the howling wind. He's been preparing his escape route for years. Linda, this warehouse, it used to be Thomas's territory before John took over. I heard nothing. All I could hear was the killer's threatening voice in my head. The escape route I've prepared for him. Thomas knew David was my only remaining weakness. He had killed my husband with a vial of poison, and now he wanted to destroy my son with despair. The suburban warehouse loomed in the dim light of the headlights. The entire area was pitch black and eerily silent. The night shift security guard lay unconscious at the entrance. I slammed on the brakes, screeching the tires, and jumped out of the car before it had even come to a complete stop. "David! Where's David?" I yelled, my voice lost in the vast space filled with towering stacks of packages. We ran into the central area of the warehouse, where David was assigned to work. The pungent smell of gasoline filled the air. In the dim light of our flashlights, I saw the forklift David usually drove had overturned. And amidst the pools of oil, my son lay there. He wasn't unconscious. He was sitting with his back against a large stack of goods, his eyes glazed over, holding an empty liquor bottle and a handful of white pills scattered on the floor. "David, what have you done?" I rushed over, grabbed his shoulders, and shook him vigorously. David looked up at me, his smile twisted and bitter. "Mother, Thomas was here. He was right. I'm a failure. I betrayed father. I betrayed mother for a deceitful woman. I don't deserve to bear father's name anymore." "You're insane. Those are the words of a murderer," I cried, trying to force him to vomit up what he'd drunk. "Thomas killed your father, David. He swapped father's medicine. He's deceiving you to complete his plan to wipe out his family." A look of horror flashed in David's eyes when he heard about John's death, but the poison had already begun to take effect. He started convulsing. Just then, the warehouse loudspeaker blared, Thomas's voice echoing through the space like the voice of death itself. "It's too late, Linda. The drug David took was specially formulated by me, the same one that killed John, but it acts faster. And to ensure there's no timely intervention." Click, click, click. The sound of gas leaks echoed from the pipes overhead. I looked up and saw sparks starting to fly from the damaged electrical panel. Thomas didn't just want to poison David. He wanted to turn this warehouse into a giant incinerator, erasing all evidence and killing me and Marcus as well. "Run, Mom," Leave me alone, David whispered, pushing me away. Never. I looked at Marcus. Help me carry him to the car. Immediately, Marcus rushed in, and we lifted David up. Every step was a battle with death. The smell of gas was suffocating. Behind us, flammable packages began to catch fire from small electrical explosions. We had just dragged David out the warehouse door when a massive explosion rocked the ground, sending everything flying onto the lawn outside. Flames shot up dozens of meters high, engulfing the entire suburban warehouse in an instant. Millions of dollars worth of goods, the last remaining evidence of Thomas's business dealings, were all gone in a cloud of smoke. The ambulance siren blared in the distance. I clutched David, who was fading in my arms. Save him. Please save him. I yelled at the paramedics who had just jumped out of the ambulance. While they placed David on a stretcher and began emergency resuscitation, Marcus approached me and handed me a tracking device that was flashing red. Linda, Thomas isn't far. He's on the hill behind the warehouse, watching us. I looked up toward the shadows of the hill. A thin figure stood there, in the light of the blazing fire. Thomas wasn't fleeing. He was savoring his victory. He thought that even if David survived, my heart would be broken and Alpha Tower would collapse when its master went mad. I wiped away my tears and stood up. The vulnerability of a mother vanished, replaced by the cold ruthlessness of a woman who had lost everything but still retained her honor. Marcus, don't call the police up the hill, I said, my voice eerily calm. Call the Alpha Shadow team. I don't want Thomas in jail. Prison is too humane for someone who ruined 10 years of my life. David was wheeled into the ambulance, his heart still beating, albeit weakly. I watched the ambulance go by, then turned back to look at the flames behind it. Thomas thought he'd won because he'd destroyed my property. He didn't know that Linda was at her most terrifying when she had nothing left to lose. Let's go, Marcus, I said, getting into the car. Tonight, we'll finish this chapter. My way. The flames behind me were still raging, consuming what little remained of the warehouse, but I didn't turn around. David had been rushed to the hospital. His life now rested in the doctor's hands, and Thomas's life now rested in mine. He thought he had won by burning the evidence and poisoning David. He thought an old woman like me would collapse and kneel at his feet. He was terribly wrong. In business, when you want to destroy a competitor, you don't just attack their assets. You have to eradicate their beliefs at their very roots. Thomas attacked my family, and now I will show him what total destruction is. Marcus, have you contacted Alpha Shadow yet? I asked, my voice as cold as metal clanging together. They've surrounded the hill, Mrs. Linda, Marcus replied, his fingers frantically tapping on his GPS. Thomas can't get away. He's in the old wooden shack at the top of the hill, the one he usually uses for secret meetings with the other traders. He still thinks he's safe. Alpha Shadow isn't a mercenary army. It's a group of former investigators and high-level security experts that John and I have cultivated over decades to handle unreachable issues. Thomas knows of their existence, but he's always believed I'm too humane to use this force. Tonight, I'll prove him that my humanity died with the fire at that warehouse. We climbed to the top of the hill, guided by two dark figures in combat gear. A wooden hut appeared, solitary and dilapidated. A dim oil lamp shone from a crack in the door. I signaled everyone to stop, and I went in alone. I wanted to see the face of the man who had killed my husband and ruined my son when he realized how wrong his calculations had been. The wooden door creaked dryly. Thomas sat there, calmly pouring himself a glass of wine, a suitcase full of money and fake passports on the table. He showed no surprise at seeing me. He smiled, the same smile that had deceived me for the past 20 years. Linda, you're quicker than I expected. Thomas took a sip of wine. But what good is it? David is probably dead. Alpha Tower will be engulfed in lawsuits over the warehouse fire and embezzlement. You're just a lifeless shell in a crumbling empire. You always thought you were the smartest person in the room, didn't you, Thomas? I walked closer to the table, looking him straight in the eye. You think medical bail is your way out? Do you know why that doctor agreed to help you so quickly? Thomas narrowed his eyes, his confidence beginning to waver. What do you mean? That doctor owes Alpha Holdings a huge sum of money from 10 years ago. I smiled, a smile that made Thomas tremble. He's following my orders. I want you out of the police station. I want you in a place where the justice of the law can't reach you. Because if you're in prison, you'll only have to serve a few years of economic punishment. But here, on this hill, you'll pay the price for John." Thomas jumped to his feet, intending to pull a gun from under the table, but a red laser beam struck him directly in the forehead. Two Alpha Shadow members emerged from the shadows, disarming him in an instant. "You think the heart medication was John's only secret?" I pulled an old tape recorder from my jacket pocket. "This is a recording John left in the family's secret safe, the one you'll never find. John suspected you 10 years ago. He didn't die of surprise. He prepared for this betrayal. He just didn't expect you to be so ruthless." Thomas began to gasp for breath, his face pale. What are you going to do to me? Kill me? You'll go to jail." "No, Thomas. I don't have dirty hands like you." I turned to Marcus. "The Alpha Shadow team has seized all of Thomas's underground accounts in tax havens. All of that money has been transferred to a charity named John. Now, Thomas, you don't have a penny left. All your connections, all your accomplices have been bought off or threatened to turn against you." I moved closer, leaned in, and whispered in his ear, "The doctor injected you with a substance that slows your heart rate while you wait for bail. In the next hour, you'll feel exactly what John went through. The convulsions, the deprived breath, and the absolute solitude. No defibrillator, no rescue. Just you and the darkness." Thomas collapsed to the floor, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with terror. He tried to scream, but only a series of hopeless gasps escaped his lips. "Linda, please save me." I coldly turned and walked out of the shack. "My justice has no forgiveness, Thomas. You chose to live like a snake, so die in the cold darkness." As I walked down the hill, Marcus received a call from the hospital. "Linda, David is out of danger. The doctors flushed his stomach in time, and the medication wasn't enough to kill him." I stopped, looking up at the night sky. A hot tear rolled down my cheek. David was alive. My family still had hope. "Get in the car, Marcus," I said, my voice softening but still commanding. "Tomorrow morning, I want all the newspapers reporting Thomas's disappearance after the fire. Alpha Holdings will officially enter a new era, an era without the shadow of the traitor. The bloodiest battle is over. The enemy has been punished, my son has been saved. But this kingdom needs one final overhaul to become truly impregnable. The final chapter of my life is only just beginning." 6 months later, the brilliant morning sun streamed through the reinforced glass of Alpha Tower, bathing the CEO's office in a golden glow. I sat in John's old oak chair, gazing out at the bustling city skyline. Gone were the red-stained audit files on my desk. Instead, there were reports of record growth and invitations to an international stock exchange listing. Alpha Holdings had not only revived, it had become a more transparent and robust empire than ever before. Down in the building's lobby, a delivery truck pulled up. I smiled when I saw David. After 6 months working in the warehouse and undergoing rigorous training, my son had completely transformed. Gone was the polished, weak appearance of the past. David was now strong, calm, and appreciated the value of hard work. He no longer demanded the CEO position. He was climbing the management ladder through genuine ability. David had signed the divorce papers and completely severed ties with his troubled past. The last time my son and I saw each other, he only said one thing. "Thank you, Mom, for not abandoning me when I abandoned myself." As for Emily, justice was served thoroughly. With irrefutable evidence of embezzlement and fraud, she received a 12-year prison sentence. All the assets she had stolen, including the penthouse and expensive jewelry, were auctioned off to compensate for the Alpha Tower Employee Welfare Fund. In prison, she was alone, penniless, powerless, only loneliness and belated regret for her insatiable greed. Thomas, the real mastermind, vanished forever that night at the cabin. The police found only an empty office and reports that his entire underground fortune had been wiped out. The world believed he had fled abroad, but Marcus and I knew the truth. Thomas had confronted his greatest fear, emptiness and death in the shadows, just as he had harmed John 10 years earlier. Marcus walked into the office and placed a new project map on my desk. "Everything's ready, Mrs. Linda. The John Foundation has completed the construction of 10 schools for underprivileged children. His legacy is now not just numbers, but lives changed." I looked at the photograph of John on my desk. His eyes seemed to be smiling at me. This battle had taken so many tears from me, but it had also taught me. Kindness without strength is weakness, but strength without kindness is the seed of destruction. I stood up, adjusting my elegant yet understated suit. Today was the shareholders' meeting, the day Alpha Tower officially announced its public ownership structure. I walked out of the office, past the rows of employee desks. They no longer bowed their heads in fear as they had during Emily's time. They held their heads high, smiling and greeting me with the respect they had for a leader who had protected them through the storm. Stopping in front of the large conference room, I saw David waiting. He adjusted my tie, his eyes full of pride. "Are you ready, Mom?" David asked. "I'm always ready, son." I patted him on the shoulder. "Because we're not just building a company. We're protecting our home." As the doors to the conference room opened, hundreds of flashlights flashed. I stepped onto the podium, boldly proclaiming a new future. The story of a woman betrayed by her daughter-in-law and son was over. Now, it was the story of a queen who rose from the ashes to reclaim her kingdom and uphold justice. Those who once thought I was old and weak must now bow their heads. They forgot one thing. Diamonds are formed only under immense pressure. And after all this, I still stand here, stronger than ever. Alpha Tower still stands here, proudly against the sky. My family's legacy has been cleansed and shines brighter than ever. Thank you for following my journey to seek justice. Remember, in this life, traitors may go fast, but the righteous will go the furthest. Never let anyone take away the pink slip from your life.